Now, given the fact that today, when the world pays attention to the war between Russia and Ukraine, but meanwhile, it's crucial we also look at another two countries. One is Armenia, and that one is Azerbaijan. Now, what about this ongoing political struggles and also this international conflict between the two countries? And how about the significant partnership in terms of India? And we are going to get to all the questions today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite Dr. Melikyan. Now, Dr. Melikyan is a policy analyst and a political advisor with a considerable personal, academic, and professional experience in foreign and security policies, as well as domestic politics. Dr. Melikyan, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Well, sir, the pleasure's all mine. Now, I know your time is very precious. Now, let's get to the questions. As we mentioned before, that the whole world is still paying attention to the war in in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine at this moment. But meanwhile, why is it so significant also for people to understand the political and also this economic struggles between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Can you help us to understand?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the interest to the region that sometimes can be a region which is somehow overshadowed by more important issues like the war in Ukraine. And you're right completely that people are paying more attention to that war. But all wars matter. And unfortunately, in the 21st century, we still see how the use of force is still one of the favorite or preferred methods and means in the international system. And it's very unfortunate to see that even after two big wars that many nations were involved in, we still have conflicts and nations are trying to resolve their conflicts by armed means. But this is the international relations system, and we have this, and the anarchic world is still there. And unfortunately, the cooperation is not the main stimulating condition for many nations. So people are struggling. But in this case, and in the case of Russia, Ukraine, and Armenia and Azerbaijan, we are dealing with the so-called the collapse of the Soviet Union, the breakup of the Soviet Union, which happened almost 30 years ago. And unfortunately, until now, we are seeing how this process of collapse is still an ongoing process, unfortunately. We all hoped in 1991, I was young, and I was a student when this process started in 1988, basically the end of the Soviet Union, which happened in 1991. We all hope that everything is over and that the communist regime and the Red Dragon, as some people, or the axis of evil, as some people in the United States were calling the Soviet Union, rightly, by the way, was done. It was finished. No, but we see that we still are struggling with the legacy of the Soviet Union, which was the false federalism, which means that countries, nations living in the Soviet Union, like in Yugoslavia, the breakup was quite painful, was not a happy divorce, and nations have and still have some expectations from the former Soviet Union legacy, because all of them or some of them still want to take more than they can from each other, and it brings to more conflict rather than cooperation. Although all these countries like Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Central Asian countries or Baltic states, they all have been in the same economic and political area, and they had sort of modus vivendi, like how to live together. But rightly, we can say that everything, when it is done by the force, has no long history. You cannot expect that nations which have been incorporated forcibly into one Soviet Union could also be in very good relations afterwards. So what is happening in Russia is the process of the ongoing process of the collapse of the Soviet Union, where Russia still wants to keep its influence over all republics that it used to have during the Soviet period. So, and also all those nations living inside of different other republics, it is called federalists, like, like Armenians living in Azerbaijan. And when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened, Azerbaijan claimed that those territories belong to them because during the Soviet time, well, yes, they have control over them. But of course, we are dealing here with the human rights and security issues, because starting from 88, 89, Azerbaijan just clearly started a military offensive, an attack over all those regions populated by the Armenians minority. And Armenians started to defend themselves, of course. And yes, we had a military success at that time. But then Azerbaijan tried to wait and use its money, its oil money, to get more weapons and still be back to Middle Ages, that you can just kill people and you can just torture them, as we see in Ukraine, like the Russian army killing and devastating cities and villages just because they think it's the right way of doing things. So basically, if we compare these two, the common trend, the common context is that all these republics are from the Soviet Union. And they still struggle for, I'm talking here from the perspective of Armenia and Armenians who are victims of Azerbaijani aggressive politics, and Ukrainians who are victims of Russian aggressive politics, because they think if they have money, if they had weapons, if they have sort of, allies, like for Turkey, it's Turkey, for Azerbaijan, it's Turkey and Pakistan. And for Russia, well, they don't really have a lot of allies, but they have a lot of money and they have a lot of weapons, so they can just use it. So the problem here that we have is not to allow, and it concerns the United Nations, basically not to allow again to have the use of force as something available for politicians, for decision leaders, to solve problems. Here we have problems for all other countries, which can see that if it's allowed to Russia, why it shouldn't be allowed for others, like Azerbaijan or many other countries. So we should not allow the use of force to become again a norm in solving problems in our system of international relations.
Dr. Melikyan, it's interesting that when we look at the war today in Ukraine, on one hand, people are very sympathetic towards the people in Ukraine. Not only we've seen and also we've heard this devastation among the citizens, and also in terms of understanding how the war completely changed the way that people understand the word humanity. But on the other hand, it's rather dangerous for some countries to build partnership, or even to be, I want to be careful, to be this economic relationship with Putin or with Russia. So for example, Belarus, and also, as you mentioned before, any other countries. So help us to understand, Doctor, why at this moment some of the countries are still interested in supporting the motives or the actions behind Russia, even though the whole international community, or should I say the majority of the members among the community, are against such alliance or against such ruthless behavior? And how about the reaction from Azerbaijan and also Armenia? How should we balance that?
Well, it's a very complicated question, and I don't know if people like analysts and even politicians or decision makers in many countries have a common understanding of why, for example, in Hungary, or for example in Italy, or even in Germany, you can find, maybe now it's less than before, but you can still find those who try to understand Russia, try to see what is the motivation behind that, or even blame Ukrainians for not doing this or that thing. It's quite a complicated situation, and it's very difficult because maybe they have I think there are 2 or 3 explanations for that. First of all, is economic problem that these countries can face. Even Armenia, for example, which doesn't really support Russia in this situation, but it has fears because it's economically dependent on that country. So economic dependence, which was promoted starting from the beginning of 20th century, is one of the nice and important tools for reducing, minimizing the tension between countries by using cooperation to reduce conflict. It is still there, and unfortunately, it's not always gives nations under influence which are dependent on other countries economically. Basically, they become client states rather than just having cooperation. So those who consider themselves as client of Russia, for example, they have fears because this affects their economies. They affect the way like societies can react because people, in Europe are not happy what is going on. So the second thing is some personal connection with Russia. And also maybe some politicians are corrupted and they have financial interest in having Russia, or Russia is interested in having them and paying them for promoting, for lobbying Russia's interests. And the third is because also, some people even in Europe, even in America, they still have Marxist approaches. So some of them are Marxist or they are socialist, so they don't really think in capitalist way or in liberal terms of understanding things. So this maybe all these things, all these factors are combined, making a way that Russia has some supporters. But I think it's becoming lesser. It means less and less people are supporting Russia because Russia, I think, in my opinion, is crossing all red lines, and which is not good in general, as I already mentioned, for the system. The system is becoming again unpredictable, like it was before the First World War, before the Second World War, and during the Cold War time. And we thought that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, everything is over, and we will have more cooperation, and the liberal democracy will win. But we see that again, countries think more in realist perspectives, meaning that they try to maximize their power, they try to maximize their influence by any means, even if it goes through killings or through devastations. When it comes to Armenia and Azerbaijan, it still is complicated because Azerbaijan is becoming stronger economically and militarily. Armenia, who, by the way, is an ally of Russia, which is not my choice, unfortunately, but in the 90s, based on the situation on that time, Armenian decision makers, politicians decided to ally with Russia. But it is mostly in international relations, we don't call it alliance formation, but mostly a bandwagoning. When you have fears from a country, and instead of going against that country, in order to balance with that country, you ally with that country rather than allying against someone. We ally with someone, you bandwagon with someone, and because you are afraid to be absorbed by a bigger country. But things are changing, and my hope is that Armenia will find, and Azerbaijan too, will find more common sense and not to use force again. Although we see that in Armenia now, on the border is not that calm. I mean, to be honest, even every day we have fears that Azerbaijan will attack Armenia.
Now, Dr. Melikyan, let's move on to the question. Let's talk about the role of the United States of America. Again, when it comes to foreign policy, most of the time people are looking up to the leaders and also looking up to the senior advisors from the U.S. side. But so far, one report after another, that I'm in confidence to say that the attitude or the reaction from the U.S. side has not been very positive or promising in terms of the struggle between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, from your perspective, again, you are the expert and you study foreign policies and foreign relations for years. Help us to understand why on this matter the U.S. it's being silent. So in other words, this is not really the typical strategy for foreign policy analysis to come from the U.S. government. So in other words, what can we expect from the American side in terms of smoothing out or at least offering some tangible solutions between Armenia and Azerbaijan? What's your take on that?
I think we are exaggerating a little bit of the role of U.S. in the foreign issues. Although, yes, we always saw that Americans have been very active in many parts of the world, but I don't see how many success stories they had before and how they can see the resolution of conflicts in this part of the world, which is called the South Caucasus. Well, Americans have been involved in a format which was called, and still it is existent, it's called the OSCE Minsk Group. OSCE is an European American organization of security, and we see that they have been active during almost 25 years. But now it's the problem with Americans is that, not the problem, but the situation in Armenia is that you still have the Russian influence. The Russians are here. So when Americans want to do something, they have to take into consideration the Russian presence. They already have Ukraine, and it's quite a bit difficult problem for them. You know that the political elite of the United States was somehow divided what to do with Ukraine, help or not to help. Should they help before the war started, or were they trying to leave Ukraine to deal with its own problems so they could intervene before? So it was a complicated thing among the establishment of the United States. So here, when we talk about any impact that a country can have, including the United States, is to look at what kind of leverage they have on this or that country. It can be political, economic, or whatever, because the big politics is about deals. You make a deal with a country. So what United States can offer to Azerbaijan or Armenia as, for example, an alternative? Well, Armenia can ask for peace and can ask Americans to stop Azerbaijani aggression. But can really Americans do that? Maybe they want to do so, but do they have the capacity and the tools to have an influence over Azerbaijani decision making? You can see that, for example, the neighboring Turkey, which is an ally of the United States, which is part of the NATO. It's still, I mean, these two countries, the United States and Turkey, face many issues, and Americans simply putting in this way, they cannot have any leverage. I mean, they cannot dictate Turkish government, personal Erdogan, to do this or that thing. I mean, this is sometimes people think that Americans are so powerful. They are powerful. This is one of the only empire, the hegemon in the entire human history, which has so powerful military, army, and the economic potential, and then all kind of other things. But still, even for the United States, it was very difficult. It is still difficult to prevent, for example, Turkey from buying anti-missile system from Russia, or from intervening in Syria, or from having problem with Greece, or having problem in Cyprus, or in Libya, or in other places. So we should not exaggerate United States' role. Although I am a proponent, I would like to have Americans here in my region to have more influence economically. They couldn't, for example, prevent Georgia in 2008 from Russian attacks, although Georgia was completely, let's say, people were saying that there are two Georgia in America, which is the state of America, and the country of Georgia, which basically are part of the United States. I mean, it was a joke, but still, I mean, it was considered like Georgia, two Georgias for Americans, but they couldn't do anything. And even the country, I mean, they say, okay, maybe we should understand Putin, why they did so. We have to, maybe Georgians did something wrong. A lot of people in America were saying the same thing for Ukrainians. It's that Ukraine. Look at Mearsheimer, one of the pillars of the American foreign policy thinkers and global global thinker and political analyst, political scientist, Mearsheimer, who was basically blaming Ukraine because he was saying that big powers have to dictate, not small powers. So no small powers have to follow big powers, meaning that Ukrainians should adapt themselves to Russian politics. So again, this region is so far from the United States, and they don't have a clear foreign policy on Armenia or Azerbaijan. But that they are more involved because they see that the Russians are becoming weaker, and maybe it's an opportunity for them. For example, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, was here a couple of months ago, or the boss, the director of CIA was here, and many now we have a lot of military people coming to Armenia. Well, this is a good sign, but we have to capitalize on that. It's just visits. It's not enough, to change the foreign policy of America.
Dr. Melikyan, I know you're very busy. I got two more questions before letting you go. Now, before asking the next question, I have to say, I 100% agree with you because actions speak louder than words. It's not just about paying the lip service to the country who is suffering greatly because the war, because this unfair treatment from other bigger powers, but we really need to see more changes. Now, let's talk about the role of India. I want to read something to you, and this directly came from an article. It says, and I quote, Armenia is increasingly turning to India for its defense needs. And recently, the government placed orders for an indigenously developed missile system and artillery guns. Now, Dr. Melikyan, help us to understand, when we look at this struggle, again, this war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, what is the role that India play, and why is it essential for the government of Armenia reach out to New Delhi asking for better missile defense system and also artillery guns? What is the message behind that?
Well, I will be short in order to allow you to ask more questions maybe on that. India is an option to diversify Armenia's security options. Somehow maybe not bothering Russia because India and Russia have good relations. If, for example, Armenia tries to buy weapons from France or from the United States, it can create and it will create problems for Armenia. Armenia is Russia's ally, strategic ally, and not also a strategic ally in military, but also in economy, in politics, in everything, basically. That's why Armenia's complete dependence on Russia was leaving Armenia without alternatives. And the Armenian government before was trying to hide themselves behind this strategy and not to use their brains to diversify and to find other allies, other partners. So India is becoming sort of a neutral partner between Russia and Europe and many others. And also it seems that prices are not that high for Armenia. And Armenia, will try, because the Russians are involved in the war. They have Armenia is the first and biggest supplier of arms is Russia. So Russia has big problems with supplying arms even for its own needs. And it seems that the Russians are because they are very busy with Ukraine. So Armenia is trying to find a new option in India. And it seems that it works because with India we have kind of not bad relations, and also India maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure, but because Indians have problem with Pakistan, and Pakistan was involved in a war somehow and was supporting all the time Azerbaijan. By the way, all those who don't know, Pakistan is the only state in the world which doesn't recognize Armenia as a state. Well, there is also Saudi Arabia, but it's a completely different story. But we have two countries, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, which don't recognize Armenia as a state because they used to support Azerbaijan. Now Saudi it's less, but Pakistan more and more. So maybe Indians also, they offered themselves as a partner, and Armenian government considered this as an opportunity as something that would be less painful if, for example, Armenia would work with NATO countries. India is not a NATO country. When it comes to what exactly India will supply, this is a question to more military experts, to what extent these things will be sufficient to stop Azerbaijani aggression. But this is what Armenia really needs. I mean, more weapons. Although, again, a couple of even months ago, the Armenian government was more prone to find peaceful solution to the conflict. But now they see, and we all see, that Azerbaijan is not ready to that. So Armenia, unfortunately, again and again, goes to arm itself. Which, again, I'm saying that we are going back to the Cold War logic and mentality. When you buy more and more weapons, and a day it becomes a problem with all of them because you have to use dead weapons, or you just escalate by buying weapons because the other side, your enemy, your adversary, your rival country sees that you are arming yourself, so it sees as a sign that they have to attack. It's very complicated.
Sir, not too long ago, I'm sure that you also realized that the G20 summit took place in Indonesia. And again, it involved some of the major or significant political and also economic players. And of course, India, was there too. So to just follow your thought, by helping Armenia or by supporting or offering this generosity, or even from this military side or from this economic perspective to Armenia, how much do you think that actually elevate the image of India to this global stage? Because we know, as you mentioned before, everyone is holding different attitudes towards Russia. And of course, towards the US, Russia today seems to a major problem, not only politically, but also economically. But if India steps in, becomes the cheerleader or becomes the supporter for Armenia, how much do you think that actually benefit India in the long run? And also, how about this India-Armenia relationship? How much do you think that could influence for the bigger picture?
Well, always military cooperation is one of the most important cooperations for any partnership. When you have military cooperation, it means that your interests somehow coincide. And for India, from the perspective of India, I'm not really an Indian expert. It's very difficult for me. But I think that for India, it is important to sell its weapons because the market is full of any other weapons like a Chinese weapon or others. So, for example, Turkey got a lot of orders when it used its drones in Armenia-Azerbaijani war, and then they got a lot of orders from Ukraine and many other countries because people saw that Turkish Bayraktars are somehow effective. This is how it works. So for India, maybe they don't really have a lot of markets for their own weapons because they are buying a lot of weapons from abroad. Themselves, they are buying a lot of weapons for their own needs. And now it's a possibility for them to show to the world that they are also exporters of weapons, not just importers. I think in this, and also it's money. Why not? And also they will see how it is used in real military games, not just in theory. Well, of course, it's for India and for Armenia, it's mutually beneficial to have this cooperation. But we will see to what extent, and also the issue is that we don't know when exactly that India will supply these arms, because it will take time.
Dr. Melikyan, I want to wrap up our conversation by going back to another important topics. I know you're the expert. According to your bio, something that it's crucial for us to understand, and also for us to talk about, is what we call democratization of post-Soviet countries. When we, again, going back to the question I asked you before, it's rather difficult to understand or figure out the grand plan behind Vladimir Putin, either with his takeover politically or his invasion to Ukraine. But right now, at this moment, help us to understand what is the concept or how important it is for us to understand the concept of democracy that when we look at those post-Soviet countries. So in other words, are we going to see Putin is going to bring the countries back to the Soviet period, or is time for him to wake up and to realize in the year of 2022, and this is just not one of the tangible or feasible political solutions for the whole world? What do you think?
Well, the common sense tells us that he should stop and he should not go to war because it's making not only Ukrainians are suffering, but also his own nation is suffering. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people killed from the Russian side, and it still is ongoing process. They don't stop. So this question is very difficult, and maybe we should ask this to Putin if we have this chance, why he's behaving in this, let's say, maybe irrational way. But now I will not go to really analyze his motives and his understanding of the world, because it will be very, very extremely difficult, and it's completely different topic. But what we know clearly is Russia is not a democratic state. And yes, if not the Ukrainian crisis and the war, although people say that it was planned, I'm not sure at all that these things, like, they didn't plan to go into war for 9 months and it's still ongoing. If not the war in Ukraine, or if not the war in this way, if it finished like as the Russians were predicting or they're planning to take over Kiev, to take over all cities, and to make Ukraine and Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, to surrender immediately, and then to talk to Poland, saying that they should remove their NATO bases and NATO weapons from Poland, and also talking to the United States and forcing them to withdraw their military capacity from many other countries surrounding Russia. This was basically the plan of Putin, to make Ukraine surrender and to put the Russian flag there, and to talk from the position of the powerful, of the power. But they failed. They failed for many reasons. But yes, if they didn't, if everything was going as planned, the plan for Putin was to revive the Soviet Union. Maybe not in the same way as it was before. Maybe not under the communist ideology. Maybe not with the red flag. But still having a complete control over those countries, deciding for themselves what to do and what countries work with. Like, this concerns Belarus, this concerns Ukraine, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, and to some extent also Central Asian countries, even Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan. I'm just back from Kazakhstan a couple of days ago. I was an observer during the presidential elections. I cannot tell the source, but people there, they were afraid that they would have some concerns over Russia's aggressive stance toward Kazakhstan, because some people in Russia think that Kazakhstan is an artificial country as Ukraine, and that many territories now belong to Russia. They think in that way. And because Russians are living in Kazakhstan, the same situation was in Ukraine, and the pretext for invading the country was a sort of, human rights are not defended, the human rights of those minorities are not defended, so let's attack a country because Russians in Ukraine are always, basically they don't have rights there, so let's attack a country. So the same concerns, especially in the context of the Ukrainian war, have Kazakhstani, experts and politicians. So why Russia is behaving in this way is complete let's say, mystery, because every country should think in more positive terms. Well, all countries try to have some control, to keep its influence, like United States or many other countries, but the methods used are strange, and they are not appropriate for the 21st century.
That's right, and I think it's crucial for us to continue to pay attention to the war and also continue to pray for the people in Ukraine, in Armenia, and also help the world to understand that it might sound cliche, but the saying always works that conflict or war will never be the solution to any problems. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am talking to Dr. Melikyan, and Dr. Melikyan, it's a policy analyst and a political advisor with considerable personnel, academic, and professional experience in foreign and security policies and domestic politics. I strongly encourage everyone to go on social media to connect with Dr. Melikyan, and especially regarding to Armenia-Russia relations and also Armenia-Turkish relations, or etc., anything that relevant to the international community. Again, sir, thank you so much for taking your time to be on the show. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and we love to have you back on the show as we continue to follow the progress in Russia and also across the world. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you very much, and it was my big pleasure to be with your guest.